Hello, welcome to Julie Reads Her Bookshelf. I'm Julie. For those of you who are new to this channel, this is a channel where I read through all of the unread books on my bookshelf until we reach 0. Now, this year has gone by so quickly. We are now at the start of March. And March brings with it my favorite booktube event of the year, which is March of the Mammoths. And if you're not familiar with March of the Mammoth, this is a booktube event where we read books that are longer than 800 pages. So all those chunkers that are sitting on your bookshelves gathering dust, March is your opportunity to pull them off your shelf and at least make some attempt on them. Now, you don't have to start the book in March. You could have started it already. You don't have to finish it in March. All you need to do is make some progress towards reading the Mammoths on your bookshelf. And there's something wonderful for me, at least, about reading a really big, fat book. There's a kind of immersive quality to them where you feel like you are really spending time with that book. And we sort of don't necessarily refer to books with the language of companionship. That tends to be how we refer to people or animals. But for me, the really large books do feel like a companion to your life because you are growing and aging and developing as a person while you are reading through this book for usually an extended period of time. And one of the most important things about March of the Mammoth is that it's become this booktube event that has really defined my reading ear. So I want to talk a little bit kind of about my history of reading Mammoths in the last couple of years at least, just to give you a sense of how important this event is in the course of my reading year. So I started doing this kind of one big book a year exercise in 2021, and that was before I started this channel. And in 2021, we were in the midst of a COVID lockdown in Melbourne that was very, very extended. And during that lockdown, I had it in my head that I was going to read all 7 volumes of In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. And it took me 7 months to do it. And most of that time was spent in lockdown. And so when I look back on that period of my life now, my memory of lockdown is very much intertwined with my memory of reading Proust. So much so that I find it really difficult now to give an accurate assessment of how much I enjoyed or didn't enjoy Proust. It's just become this weird part of my life. But it's also been a really empowering exercise for me because at the time it felt like because we were in lockdown, I had to give up on going out, give up on socializing. I was living some of the best years of my life holed up inside my apartment. And in a weird way, I felt like if I had to suffer all of that, at least I should do it by accomplishing something epic and accomplishing something that I had always said I was going to do. So I had Proust on my bookshelf. This was my version of Swan's Way. I had this on my bookshelf since I think pretty much my teens, and I had never bothered to read it. So I decided to get through that book. And when I did get through that book, it was an amazing experience. And by the time I finished the book, the COVID pandemic was, if not behind us, then well and truly the days of lockdown were behind us. And that was only a good thing. So that was my kind of one big book for 2021. In 2022, I was very much encouraged by my experience of reading Proust that I thought I would tackle the other great big book on my bookshelf, which is War and Peace by Tolstoy. And that, I would say, remains my favorite Mammoth that I have ever read. And I would recommend that anyone read it. I've talked about it a few times on this channel, so I won't go into any details. War and Peace has a bit of a reputation for being kind of long and daunting for a reader, but actually it's a fairly gossipy kind of book. There's a lot of kind of intrigue and romance that keeps the story ticking along, and I actually really, really enjoy it. So it's well worth your time. Fast forward to 2023, and I think that was my first year of doing this on BookTube with everyone else. And my pick of that year, which actually did start and finish in March, was Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray, a much underrated classic. And it would have been my favorite book of the year, except for the fact that I also read Middlemarch in 2023. And I think Middlemarch is kind of a bit harder to beat as a book. But nonetheless, this book was phenomenal. It's almost a little bit like War and Peace in the sheer kind of scope of the book, and there's also kind of your war chapters and your peace chapters in this as well. But the book itself is amazing. It's an amazing book even without the central character, Becky Sharp, who is just one of the most memorable characters in fiction you'll ever read. And in 2024 was when I experienced the other side of reading Mammoths, which was I read Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and it feels like it really derailed my reading year. I've already talked about how much I hated this book last year, so I won't repeat myself, but I feel like because I was stuck in this weird mental space where I felt like I had to keep reading this book and I had to finish it, it really made me quite resentful towards both Victor Hugo, but also towards just reading big books in general. So all of that is to say that for me, at least, each of my reading years, particularly in more recent times, have been defined by the one big book I've given myself as a challenge for the year. So I really want to pick the right book this year so it doesn't derail my reading year. And I want to be also kinder to myself in that if I'm not enjoying a large book that I'm reading, I'm giving myself permission to give up on it, because I feel like that's something that I really struggle with, to the point where there's been quite a few books in recent memory where I have just absolutely hated it, become resentful of it, and yet persisted reading it. So I mean, it's a good thing that I've finished off all these books, but I also think it's really doing nothing for the rest of my reading when I'm just sort of so frustrated and hung up on the one book. So this year I have a couple of choices and I want to talk about them. So as I mentioned in my last few videos, my reading theme of 2025 is BRICS. And that is the acronym that stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So globally, they are kind of your major geopolitical alliance that is non-Western. And for me, BRICS represents a convenient starting point to force myself to read more books just from non-Western countries, because I feel like, having grown up in Australia, I have a reasonable training, education, and also access to Western literature and the major works of the Western canon, but I don't necessarily have that same degree of knowledge or background in non-Western literature. So the first option that I've got is A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, and this book is massive. So I'm not sure if you can tell, but I'm pretty sure it's longer than War and Peace. I think my version comes in at 1,475 pages. So it's quite a chunker. As I understand, this is the story of a girl's mother who is intent on finding a husband for her daughter, and hence the name A Suitable Boy. But I believe that central through line is really kind of your gateway into a whole world of these characters and their families, and a reflection on Indian society. The only other thing I know about this book is that it's set kind of right after the independence of India and partition. So there's a kind of historic background to it. And that's the part that kind of concerns me a little bit, because even though I know a little bit of Indian history, particularly around independence, I am not so familiar with what happens after. I'm not so familiar with kind of the dynamics within Indian society, the kind of agrarian reforms that they had to go through after they gained their independence. So I'm a little bit concerned more about the socio-historic aspects. And actually, that's another thing that I notice about a lot of Mammoths, which is you actually have to really know a little bit about the history and what's going on at the time that these books are set, because it's very, very difficult to write a book this long divorced from history and society and what was happening at the time of the story. The second Mammoth on my bookshelf from BRICS countries that I might want to read is Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate. So this book is actually much shorter. I think it comes in at just over 800 pages. Yeah, 855 pages. So this book follows the story of a Soviet physicist who and his family during the time of the Second World War, when the Soviet nations were fighting against mostly Nazi Germany. I don't know much more about that. I understand it's kind of a book that is about kind of the tragedy of the Russian or the Soviet people at the time, who were both fighting a foreign enemy and also fighting totalitarianism within their own borders. And it was banned, so it's kind of quite similar to Dr. Zhivago in the sense that the book has quite an interesting publication history. I did just read Dr. Zhivago, which is kind of one of the reasons why I'm sort of leaning away from reading this book in March. I think it might work a bit better in the second half of the year when I've had a little bit of a palate cleanser from my Soviet literature foray back in January. The third and final book on my pile of possibilities for March of the Mammoth is none other than Anna Karenina by Lev Tolstoy. So I've technically read Anna Karenina before. I read it when I would have been, 18 or 19. I was in first year university when I read it. I read Anna Karenina in the Maud translation, which is published by Vintage at the moment. And this is the Pevya and Volokonsky translation. And Pevya and Volokonsky have really turned themselves into the superstar translators of Russian literature. I read their version of War and Peace, and there's nothing wrong with that translation. It's just that they made a very strange choice not to translate any French in that book, and there's a lot of French in War and Peace, so it's quite a jarring experience reading through War and Peace and then having to keep jumping to the footnotes every time you see French. And I actually read French, but it's the experience of like having to jump between reading in English and reading in a foreign language that is quite kind of off-putting for me. And I just don't believe that it achieves anything either philosophically. So I sort of got on the wrong foot with them. I did read Dr. Zhivago also in their translation, and I really enjoyed it. So I am curious about their translation of Anna Karenina, because this was the book that really kind of catapulted them to the premier translators of Russian literature that they are today. So I do want to have a read through it. It's Oprah endorsed, and I wouldn't want to argue with Oprah. So that's definitely a possibility for March as well. So what do you think I should read for March? Should I go for Anna Karenina? Should I continue my exploration of Soviet era literature by reading Life and Fate? Or should I go for the big chunker, which is A Suitable Boy? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what your plans are for March of the Mammoth. It is, as I said, one of my favorite booktube events of the year. So I'd be curious to see what you are planning to read for March of the Mammoth as well. All right, I'll see you very soon. Bye.